in my
is,
favor.
That's okay. Much has been made of the term constitutional sheriff. You mentioned it just a few moments ago. What is a constitutional sheriff, and are you one, and what is the opposite of a constitutional sheriff?
A constitutional sheriff is someone who literally interprets the Constitution as essentially his oath of office. Okay, you swear in when you take the job of sheriff, but it means that you literally follow the Constitution. One of the problems that we have in the United States right now in the political sphere is that we have a lot of judges who very liberally interpret the Constitution. We have people in Washington, D.C. right now who feel the Constitution is a archaic document that should be done away with. It means that just like on the question of gun control, if the Constitution says that you're allowed to have weapons, then I believe you're allowed to have weapons. Now, a constitutional sheriff's candidate looks at the federal Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, but then he looks also at the Tennessee Constitution. You ought to read sometime the difference in the right to bear arms in the federal Constitution versus the Tennessee Constitution. In the Tennessee Constitution, for example, the right to bear arms is divided into two pieces. The first is for your self-protection. The second is to resist tyranny. It says in the Tennessee Constitution, if the government becomes tyrannical, the people are supposed to stand up to the government using weapons. That's pretty blunt. The U.S. Constitution mixes those two terms, the right of the people, the establishment of a militia, and that's where that constant argument comes from. So a constitutional sheriff believes in your First Amendment rights. He believes in your Fourth Amendment rights, that you should not be entitled to undue search and seizure. We've got a real trend in this nation right now of very violent warrants being served on people for very minor infractions. Militarization of the police. A constitutional sheriff doesn't agree with those things.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned something about people in Washington are wanting to say the Constitution is outdated, they want to do away with it. Who is saying that?
Well, a group of different people. There are liberal scholars who believe that the Constitution, they say it is not a living document, it is a dead document. Most notably at Harvard and Yale and some of those more liberal institutions, you have judges all across the country that are very liberally interpreting the Constitution and saying that it's a document whose time has passed. And there are a lot of people who believe that, just American citizens who believe that. I'm not one of them.
All right. In a general way, describe what you see as the priorities and duties of law enforcement.
I believe you can prioritize law enforcement and law enforcement activities by running through a sort of matrix, a checklist, if you will. So this is how I'll make decisions. Two separate checklists, actually. The first, for here in Grundy County, is the very first question I ask myself, is it constitutional? What we just talked about. The second is it fair? Whatever the issue is it fair? Will my approach be fair to every person in the county that's involved? The final question on that set is, can we afford it? So is it constitutional? Is it fair? Can we afford it? Pretty good guidelines, pretty simple guidelines. Beyond that, there's a second checklist, a second matrix. The first obligation of a sheriff is protection of the public. If you have a problem, you're facing some circumstances, the very first thing you ask is, what is my obligation here as far as protecting the public? The second is protecting the staff. That's protecting the inmates. That's protecting the deputies. And that's pretty broad. You can protect the deputies by giving them better gear, making sure they have backup, giving them better training, but protection of the staff, which also includes protection of the facility in the sense of making sure that bad guys aren't coming and going in the facility in ways they're not supposed to. The third is protection of the inmates, taking care of their health, hygiene, and medical needs. Medical needs being emergency medical needs, vice health. Next is protection of property. Okay, so you can see how when you're faced with a decision, if you work down this matrix, you can make your decisions. protection of the public, protection of the staff, protection of the inmates, protection of property, and then the final obligation and priority is supportive care and treatment programs in the community, social services.
Okay. How will you work with Grundy County's EMS and volunteer firefighters?
I'm a basic trained firefighter myself, and I'm a first responder instructor. I have a real appreciation for the work of both groups. Grundy County's EMS service is one of the things that, one of the pluses that brought us to Grundy County. Mary, my wife, has some medical issues, and I wanted to be assured this far out in a rural community that if something came up, she could immediately get the help she needed. And Grundy County's EMS reputation is nationally known, absolutely dedicated people. And so we'll do whatever we can to support them, such things as setting up the scene and supporting medical evacuations and so forth. But frankly, they don't need a lot of help from us from law enforcement at this point. They've pretty much got their act together. The volunteer firefighters, paid firefighters do have some special challenges with law enforcement. Very often, law enforcement folks tend to be pretty bossy folks. We get on a scene and we want to take over, and frankly, sometimes it's the fire chief's job. It's always the fire chief's job on a fire scene to be in charge of that scene, and until he releases it, law enforcement shouldn't be in the way. So making sure that law enforcement knows its lane in the road, if you will, concerning volunteer firefighting, and that they understand the job of volunteer firefighters. One thing that I will require deputies to do is attend at least 2 sessions a year of a volunteer firefighter meeting, so they just get in and meet people and get a flavor of what's going on in that community. And I would also expect the deputies to participate twice a year in field exercises. That's actually get out in the field, put on bunker gear, you know, the uniform that firefighters wear when they're fighting fires, pull hoses, one time in the summer, one time in the winter. You get a real appreciation for that bunker gear when it's 102 degrees outside or 10.
You mentioned about the very low salaries for deputies. What can you do, or what can we do as citizens to improve that?
The first step is we have to baseline that budget and understand where that money's really going. The second step is we get the CPA folks involved and get their recommendations. We just did a study, my team did a week ago, of the salaries of the counties in the area that surround us to see how we compare. 2 departments have yet to respond, but the average salary in the counties around us is $15.85 an hour. It's going to go up or down a few cents depending upon those other the response of those other 2 departments. The average salary at the Grundy County Sheriff's Office right now is $7.25. $7.25 an hour. $7.25 an hour. You start at Walmart, you make $10.10 an hour. And yet we're expecting these young men and women to give us their very best. I needed some information today from a senior member of the Sheriff's Department. I just wanted to get a little bit of information and get his insight into something. And we attempted to contact him. He's out in the woods logging. He's out in the woods logging to make enough money to take care of his family. A leader. One of the smartest guys in the department. There's something wrong with that. What can we do about it? We can baseline the department and get our hands around exactly what's going on over there. Then we work with the mayor. The Tennessee Sheriff's Handbook says, the law says, that within 30 days of taking office, the sheriff either enters into an agreement with the mayor or he has to sue the mayor for the proper coverage of deputies in the county. I have every reason to believe that we could reach consensus, but if not, that's just what has to be done. That's the way the system works. And that's not a lawsuit where money's exchanging hands and those sorts of things. It's just get the judge to make a decision on who's right.
You also mentioned there was a problem in providing outlying areas of the county with police protection. How will you improve that?
It depends on what resources are there and what resources we can gain. That's step one. Again, back to the baseline. I've got 3 different rosters from the Grundy County Sheriff's Office. One shows that we have 22 deputies, One shows that we have 26 and one shows that we have 34. So some of those may include jailers and not include jailers. I don't know right now what the exact coverage is. We don't know how many positions are vacant and can be filled, and we don't know how many positions just don't exist. So again, we have to go back to the Tennessee law and consider the issue of manpower coverage, working with the mayor. But we have definitely got to get coverage down into Pelham, what we've begun to call on our little campaign team here, the Forgotten Valley. They don't have the coverage they need. We can also look at going for federal grants. I'll give you an example. If there's a school question in here, this may ruin a future school question, but the greater Tampa Bay area, which includes a couple of counties and a couple of cities, just received well over, I think it was $2.5 million or $3 million, somewhere in that range, I don't recall the exact figure, to put 3 school resource officers in every school in the county. Now that's probably hundreds of schools. I don't know how many schools to be exact, but it's a lot. It's a big area. 3 school resource officers in every school for 3 years, 100% reimbursed. The second 3 years, 75% reimbursed, and the next 2 to 3 years, it was a lesser amount, something like 50% reimbursed. From the Department of Justice, and we didn't even ask for that money. We can do the same thing with road deputies.
What are your core values, your core beliefs, both morally and politically?
My core beliefs morally, pretty simple. God, service, family, self. I do not believe that you can be a law enforcement executive and not be grounded spiritually. I believe that the decisions that a sheriff has to make should be made prayerfully. If in doubt, the sheriff needs to exit the situation, spend some time on his knees, and get the guidance he needs. I believe in being dedicated to my wife, my family. I don't believe in abusing my power in any way. I'm fully cognizant of the fact that if I'm forced to use force, take somebody's life, or injure somebody, one day, my moral beliefs tell me, I have to stand before God and explain myself. Spilled blood. That's a pretty serious thing to account for in the hereafter. I believe that a law enforcement officer that is arrogant or a bully is absolutely one of the most dangerous human beings in a community. Absolutely. There was a second part, political values. Was that the second part of the question? Okay. Politically, as a law enforcement officer, I believe in protection, not politics. That's why I ran as an independent. I don't have anything against either party, although this week's certainly been trying. But I do believe in being objective, and as a law enforcement officer, I don't believe politics have any part in the decision-making process.